بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين. وكان الله بكل شيء عليما. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا وسبحوه بكرة وأصيلا. هو الذي يصلي عليكم وملائكته ليخرجكم من الظلمات إلى النور. وكان بالمؤمنين رحيما. تحيتهم يوم يلقونه سلام وأعد لهم أجرا كريما. يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا. فبشر المؤمنين بأن لهم من الله فضلا كبيرا. الله أكبر ولله الحمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تطع الكافرين والمنافقين ودع أذاهم وتوكل على الله كفى بالله وكيلا. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر ولله الحمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. محمد رسول الله والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم تراهم ركعا سجدا يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا سيماهم في وجوههم من أثر السجود سيماهم في وجوههم من أثر السجود ذلك مثلهم في التوراة ومثلهم في الإنجيل كزرع أخرج شطأه فآزره فاستغلظ فاستوى على سوقه يعجب الزراع ليغيظ بهم الكفار وعد الله الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات منهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. رحم الله والغرفات مع الصلوات.
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. हैदर उठा रहे हैं जनाज़ा रसूल का। हैदर उठा रहे हैं जनाज़ा रसूल का। दो फातिमा यतीम कपुर सा रसूल का। हैदर उठा रहे हैं जनाज़ा रसूल का। जाते हो छोड़ कर हमें ए नाना जा कहाँ। जाते हो छोड़ कर हमें ए नाना जा कहाँ। कहता था रो के छोटा नवा सा रसूल का। हैदर उठा रहे हैं जनाज़ा रसूल का। सर को झुका के रोती है बात کی سوگوار سر کو جھکا کے روتی ہے بابا کی سوگوار زہرا کی موت ہو گئی مرنا رسول کا حیدر اٹھا رہے ہیں جنازہ رسول کا رونا وہ سیدہ کا وہ کہنا حسین کا رونا وہ سیدہ کا وہ کہنا حسین کا اماں پتہ بتائیے نا رسول کا حیدر اٹھا رہے ہیں جنازہ رسول کا ہے وہ محمد کی صدا ہر طرف بلند ہے وہ محمد کی صدا ہر طرف بلند روتا ہے سارا کنبہ وہ پیارے رسول کا حیدر اٹھا رہے ہیں جنازہ رسول کا حیدر لٹا رہے ہیں لحد میں رسول کو حیدر لٹا رہے ہیں لحد میں رسول کو سر پیٹتا ہے قبر پہ رسول کا حیدر اٹھا رہے ہیں جنازہ رسول کا ہوتا ہے آج صاحب میرا زیر خاک ہوتا ہے آج صاحب میرا زیر خاک چھپتا ہے ہائے چاند سا چہرہ رسول کا حیدر اٹھا رہے ہیں جنازہ رسول کا دو فاطمہ یتیم کو پر رسول کا حیدر اٹھا رہے ہیں جنازہ رسول کا بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات
بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات یثرب میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ رسول کا، یثرب میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ رسول کا، خون رو رہا ہے قلب علی و بطول کا، یثرب میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ رسول کا، مسجد اداس خانہ کعبہ ہے سوگوار، شہر نبی کی آج فضا ہے غم گزار، آتی ہے یہ صدائیں، آتی ہے یہ صدائیں مدینے سے بار بار، یثرب میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ رسول کا، اسلام رو رہا ہے کہ امجد نہیں رہے، شاہ انام زینت مسند نہیں رہے، زہرا یتیم ہو گئی، زہرا یتیم ہو گئی، احمد نہیں رہے، یثرب میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ رسول کا، دنیا میں مومنو یہ قیامت کی ہے گھڑی، خود رو رہی ہے حال پہ زہرا کی بے کسی، آیا نہ کوئی پاس جنازے کے امتی، یثرب میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ رسول کا، گردن میں ہوگی حیدر کرار کے رسن، گردن میں ہوگی حیدر کرار کے رسن، پہلو میں مصطفیٰ کے نام سو پائیں گے حسن، تیروں پہ ہوگا سید مظلوم کا بدن، یثرب میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ رسول کا، ہر سمت کائنات میں آہو بکا ہے آج، گھر میں رسول پاک کے ماتم بپا ہے آج، دنیا میں گل چراغے رسالت ہوا ہے آج، یثرب میں اٹھ رہا जनाज़ा रसूल का। अफसोस ये विदाए रिसालत का रोज़ है, अल्ताफ क्या लिखूं के क़यामत का रोज़ है। रहमानी ये नबी के शहादत का रोज़ है, यसरब में उठ रहा है जनाज़ा रसूल का। यसरब में उठ रहा है जनाज़ा रसूल का। अल्लाह लानतुल्लाहि अलल कौमिज़ ज़ालिमीन बर मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु।
Brothers and sisters, my elders, respected scholar, Assalamu alaikum. Tonight's program is sponsored by Bande Khuda for the Isale Sawab of Taj Muhammad, son of Aziz Bakhsh, Zainab Bibi, daughter of Abdullah, Muhammad Ali Akhtar, son of Abdullah, Ali Hussein, son of Abdullah. Please recite Surah Fatiha for these marhumeens and all the other marhumeens. As well, if I can ask you to recite Surah Fatiha for Marhum Shirin by Azhar Ali Fazal Ibrahim, daughter of Rajab Ali Salim Muhammad Jagani, who passed away in Birmingham, as well as Marhuma Gulshan by Abdullah Sajid. Al-Fatiha. If I can ask everyone to please recite 3 loudest salawat to welcome Shaykh Azhar Nasser, and at the same time please come forward. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. My dear brothers and sisters, in addition to the marhumeen that were mentioned, I'd like also to request that you recite Surah Al-Fatiha for a great scholar who departed yesterday in London, Samahat al-Sayyid Fadil al-Milani, who was the official representative of Sayyid al-Sistani in London. And he was not just a representative of many maraja. He was one of the few scholars in the world who attained the level of ijtihad in Hawza circles, and who also was an academic, a doctor. So for his soul and in his memory and for all that he has done for the Shia community around the world, let us remember him with a Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah. Before we begin tonight's majlis in honor of the departure of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, it's always beneficial to revisit some of the relevant ahkam that have an impact, especially on the validity of our ibadah. We spoke for a number of weeks on the ahkam of wudu, and we want to ensure that we perfect our wudu, because the ahadith tell us, La salata illa بطهور. That there is no valid prayer without that state of tahara. And because wudu gives us that state of tahara, we need to ensure that we're not making mistakes in the way that we perform our wudu. Now, when we perform wudu, the question that arises is, what invalidates our wudu? When a person performs wudu, your wudu remains in effect. There is no time expiration for your wudu. If you perform wudu, you are in a state of tahara unless one of the 7 things that I'm going to mention takes place. The first and second things that invalidate your wudu is al-bawl wal-gha'at, urination and defecation. If urine comes out of the urethra, your wudu is batil, whether it's a lot or 1 drop. If any fecal matter comes out of the rectum, your wudu is batil. If someone is ill and they undergo surgery and they have a colostomy bag, whereby now the waste is being deposited and it's exiting the body, not through the original exit, but through an alternative route. If the waste is now coming out of a new orifice, the wudu would be batil. If anything other than urine or fecal matter comes out of these 2 orifices, the wudu is not batil. So for example, if someone is ill and God forbid pus comes out, it doesn't invalidate the wudu. If someone has an illness, a condition, and blood comes out, God forbid, blood comes out of the urethra or the rectum, it doesn't invalidate your wudu. You would have to purify that specific region of the body with water, but it doesn't invalidate your wudu. So this is the first and the second. Urination and defecation are going to invalidate your wudu. Number 3, khurujul rih, passing gas, is going to invalidate your wudu. Number 4 is kullu ma yuzilu al-aql. Anything that removes the intellect is going to invalidate your wudu. For example, God forbid if someone has a bout of insanity, someone literally clinically loses their minds, their wudu would become batil. If someone faints, if you fall unconscious, let's say it's a hot day or your blood sugar drops and you faint, if you become unconscious, even if it's for a second, your wudu becomes invalid. You have to renew your wudu. If someone becomes drunk, God forbid, they become intoxicated. As people that become intoxicated, usually they're not looking for the masail of wudu. But God forbid if it does happen, or if a person becomes intoxicated without realizing it. Maybe you thought you were drinking 7-Up, but, someone laced your drink, God forbid, and you become intoxicated. If you become intoxicated, your wudu becomes invalid. The next is an-nawm al-ghalibu ala as-sam', sleep. Sleep that makes you lose your ability to hear your surroundings. Basically, you lose your awareness. Not if you close your eyes during my majlis. If you close your eyes during my majlis, I'm going to assume that you're engaged in deep tafakkur. I'm not going to assume that you're sleeping. But if you lose your awareness of what is around you, you invalidate your wudu. Number 6 is, and this applies to the ladies, if there is istihadha, if there is irregular bleeding, not the menstrual bleeding, irregular bleeding that is light or of a medium level, this would invalidate your wudu. You would have to renew your wudu. And then finally, the 7th category is janaba, which is either through sexual intercourse or the emission of discharging of semen. That would invalidate your wudu, and you would need to do ghusl. Nifas, postpartum bleeding, which is related to the ladies, or hayd, or menstrual bleeding. Now, anything other than these 7 are not going to invalidate your wudu. If you're bleeding, if you throw up, these things do not invalidate the wudu. One of the most common misconceptions is blood. If I get a cut on my body, if blood comes out of my body, that doesn't invalidate your wudu. Yes, you have to purify the najasa, but it does not invalidate your wudu. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد نعلم أنك يضيق صدرك بما يقولون فسبح بحمد ربك وكن من الساجدين واعبد ربك حتى يأتيك اليقين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You will never meet a great personality, a person of great achievement, a person of excellence, without them having gone through great difficulties and traumatic life events. You will never meet a great person who just lived their lives in the lap of luxury. You will never meet a person of great achievement who lived a life of comfort and ease. If you ever come across a person of great stature, a person of greatness, a person of great character, know that that person has been through great trials and tribulations. Now, in our theology, we believe that the greatest human being among all people is none other than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa ali Muhammad. And it is not a coincidence that the greatest of all human beings was also the one who endured the most hardships. There is a relationship between greatness and struggle. If you look at the ahadith, our imams tell us, إِنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ بَلَاءً الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. The people in life who go through the most difficulties are the prophets. Not you and I. You and I, we have our problems. But our problems and our difficulties, they pale in comparison to the great challenges that were faced by the prophets. So Imam al-Sadiq, he says, those who endure the greatest calamities in life, they are the prophets. And among all of the prophets, our prophet says, مَا أُوذِيَ نَبِيٌّ بِمِثْلِ مَا أُذِيتَ. There is no prophet who suffered as I suffered. All prophets experienced traumatic events in their lives. All of them, without exception. Now there is a difference between experiencing trauma and becoming a traumatized person. You see, trauma is the way that our mind and our bodies respond to distressing and disturbing events. And in many cases, when people go through difficulties, they lose their sense of self. They feel defeated. They descend into despair and hopelessness. But when you look at the Prophet ﷺ, not only did he not lose himself in the fire of trials and tribulations, not only did his sense of self not diminish, he was able to elevate himself through those very trials and tribulations. Now, that's not to say that the Prophet didn't feel anything. You know, sometimes the way that we depict prophets and imams can be very damaging, because sometimes we might portray them as superhumans who just don't feel anything, who go through life without anything bothering them, without anything shaking them to their core. And that's not what we see in the Quran. When you look at the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acknowledges the pain of the Prophet. You know, you can be a great person, you can elevate yourself, and you can still feel pain along the way. To be great doesn't mean that you become numb. It doesn't mean that you just brush things off your shoulder and you move on and you don't even allow yourself to process the gravity of your calamities. And this is why in Surah Al-Hijr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He addresses the Prophet. And He says what? And mind you, Surah Al-Hijr was revealed in Mecca. And this surah was revealed when the persecution was at an all-time high. You know, brothers and sisters, when we came into the masjid today, we had some of the brothers who were volunteering, security, making sure that everything is in order, to make sure that mu'mineen and mu'minat who come here are safe. The Muslims in Mecca did not have that luxury. When they used to pray, when they used to congregate, they would get physically assaulted. So the Muslims were enduring a lot of suffering in Mecca. And by the way, when a Muslim is physically or verbally assaulted, who has to deal with that problem? Who is the leader? The Prophet. The Prophet feels responsible for his people. So when we hear about the suffering of Ammar ibn Yasir and his parents, don't think that's only something that family went through. The Prophet was a partner. He shared in all of the suffering because he's the leader. When the Muslims are suffering, when they're being oppressed, when their rights are being taken away from them, when their property is being confiscated, who are they turning to solve the problem? They're turning to the Prophet. And the Prophet himself is being verbally abused daily. You know, some of us, when we go to work and a colleague makes a snarky comment, some of us, it ruins our entire day. We can't think. We get home and we tell our spouses and we post it on social media because of one insulting comment that might happen once in a blue moon. Imagine every day you are being called an insane person. And not by strangers. Your uncle is telling the people this. You know, it's very different if a stranger attacks you. But it sounds much more credible when the insult is coming from your own family. The Prophet is being called Sahir, Majnoon, insane person, sorcerer, you name it. The Prophet was mocked. And not only was he verbally abused, you have the wife of Abu Lahab, the wife of his uncle, Jamil. What would she do? She would memorize the Prophet's paths, the routes that he would take when he would walk around Mecca. And she would go and she would throw thorns, thorny bushes, so that he steps and he injures himself. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah doesn't ignore the psychological pain of the Prophet, the emotional pain. Allah acknowledges it. وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. Ya Rasulullah, I know that your heart is in pain because of what they say. I know that your heart is constricted. You have this leak, this tightness in your chest because of the mockery, because of the taunting. We know that. So you see, Allah begins by doing what? He acknowledges that there is real pain there. It's not easy. It's not easy to be mocked. It's not easy to be insulted day in and day out. The Prophet felt that. He's a human being. He feels pain. It doesn't feel good to be ridiculed. وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. There's an acknowledgement. And sometimes, even in our interpersonal relationships, it's important that before we help people, that we acknowledge that they're in a tight spot. That I acknowledge that you're in a difficult situation. Sometimes that acknowledgement is all that people need. That's all that they want. That's that validation that I'm not losing my mind, that this is truly a difficult situation. So what does Allah say to the Prophet? What is the solution to this? The solution is what? Allah tells you, this is a prescription from Allah for the anxiety and the emotional suffering. فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ. Do tasbih. Now this might sound like the typical Maulana prescription to all of our problems. You have a problem? Do tasbih. But what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to teach the Prophet? It is human nature that when you are confronted with a problem, that problem becomes so magnified that it is all that you see. When you have a problem, it is human nature to focus on your problem and to focus on nothing but your problem. And guess what happens? What you focus on grows. What you focus on gets amplified. If you focus on the negative things in life, what's going to happen to you? You're going to be a negative person. So what is Allah telling the Prophet when He says, فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ? Glorify and praise your Lord. He's telling the Prophet, shift your attention from the negative to the positive. Yes, you have all of these enemies, but look at who you have on your side. You have Allah Azza wa Jal. You have Allah on your side. If you focus on the problems are going to grow. I'm not saying ignore your problems. What I'm saying is don't make your problems bigger than they actually are. Identify the problem, but shift your attention to the ultimate problem solver, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. See, tasbih is training for us to shift our attention from the limitations, to shift it away from the problems to the unlimited, the source of all of our solutions. It trains our mind to not become defeatist. Because if you're always thinking about Allah, who is all powerful, who is all merciful, naturally you're going to become an optimistic person. Because there is no such thing as impossible for Him. For you and I, if we tackle our problems independent of Allah, then we're going to feel defeated. We're going to feel overwhelmed. فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُنْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. And be among those who do sujood. Notice here, Allah doesn't say, be among of those who do qunut, be among those who do ruku'. The prescription is very specific. You have big problems, go down into sujood. Because even from a physiological perspective, you know, your brain is a very sophisticated machine. And the frontal cortex of your brain is the command center. And when you're walking and you're going about your day, for the blood to reach this part of the brain, your body has to do what? It has to fight gravity. When you go down into sujood, if you look at the anatomy of a sajda, you are basically placing your forehead on the turba, on the earth. And your heart in sujood is elevated. And what happens is that the blood flow, and this is something that you can even research on your own, the health benefits of prostration, especially on earth, and you can research earthing and grounding and all of these things. Blood flow is being directed to what? To the frontal cortex. And what is happening is that the blood flow is directed towards the command center of your brain. And what is essentially happening is that that part of your brain, which is in charge of the thinking and the decision making and all of that, it's getting massaged during sujood. So when you're in sujood and you have that physiological benefit and you're doing tasbih, I guarantee you, try this. Don't even take my word for it. Try it. The next time you have a big problem, go down into sujood and just say Subhanallah 100 times and take a deep breath after every tasbih. Do that and make that a habit. That whenever you feel that the world is caving in on you, follow the same prescription that Allah gave to the Prophet. The Prophet had bigger problems than you. If it worked for him, it will work for you. فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُمْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. It's very important, brothers and sisters, that we reflect on who our leader is. Our leader is the Prophet. Our role model is the Prophet. And sometimes we forget how much loss the Prophet endured in his life. You know, when we go through life, we lose jobs, we lose loved ones, we lose our health, we lose a lot of things in life. That's the nature of life. Allah tells us in the Quran, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. We are in a perpetual state of loss. We're losing everything. Some of us are losing our hair. It's not that bad to lose your hair, but the point is we're all in a state of loss. If you look at the Prophet, from the moment he came into this world, he was experiencing loss. He came into this world in a state of loss. His father died when he was a fetus. You know, sometimes when we speak about the Prophet, we kind of gloss over that part of his life as if it's not a big deal. Let's just get to the real interesting stuff. To be born as an orphan in 7th century Arabia was a huge disadvantage. Because you're talking about a society where your entire identity is based on who your father is. Your entire identity is based on who your father is. If you look at the names of Arabs, it's Fulan ibn Fulan. The Prophet comes, there's no father there. He's born at a disadvantage. And that's why the life of the Prophet is a beacon of hope for anyone who is born in a state of disadvantage. You know, you grow up in a single parent household, well, guess what? Your Prophet also grew up in such a house. Fatima Az-Zahraa, there was a time where she also grew up in such a household. And then, after a few years, he loses his mother. So father and mother are gone very early in life. That means that if you're a kid who's growing up and you didn't enjoy the tender love and attention from your parents, either because they were dead or they were absent, whatever the case may be, that void was also felt by what? By who? By the Prophet. And then he's taken into the custody of his grandfather. You know, it's very difficult when you develop an attachment to people and then they're taken away. Then he's into the custody of Abdul Muttalib. And then at the age of 8, Abdul Muttalib passes away. And then he joins the family of his uncle Abu Talib. And then as the years go by, the Prophet, he marries Khadija, the most beloved person to him in this world. And they have children. You would think that, okay, now life is going to get easy. But then he has to bury children. Not one, multiple children. The Prophet buries. If there's ever a parent, God forbid, may Allah never subject you to this type of tribulation. But if you ever have to bury a child, when you cry for that child, know that Rasulullah was there. He experienced that. He had to bury children. Did you lose a spouse? Sometimes we don't just lose parents and grandparents, we lose spouses. You lost your husband, you lost your wife, Rasulullah also lost. That's why the Prophet is very unique among other prophets, because he's so relatable. And what makes him so relatable is that he suffered in so many different ways, where you would be pressed to find a type of suffering that the Prophet himself didn't endure. Sickness, death. The Prophet loses Khadija, he loses his own sons, and he loses his home. Have you ever been driven out of your home? Did you have to migrate? You know, many of us are immigrants. The Prophet ﷺ was also an immigrant. He was pushed out of his home. He had to leave behind the people that he loved. And can you imagine? Khadija is buried in Mecca. The Prophet being forced to leave Mecca means what? I don't know when I'm going to visit the grave of my wife again. I don't know when I'm going to visit the graves of my children. Sometimes we forget all of the layers of suffering. And then all of this is happening while his people are trying to kill him. Imagine if he was just living an ordinary life. That is enough suffering for someone. But on top of all of that loss, the people who once called you As-Sadiqul Ameen, they now want to kill you. Talk about betrayal. Have you ever been betrayed in your life? The Prophet has been betrayed. The same people who he was nothing but good to. The same people who trusted him so much that if they have gold and silver, there are no banks. The only bank is Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You trust me with money, but you want to shed my blood because you think I'm a liar? Imagine the hypocrisy, the inconsistency there. And then he leaves. Do they leave him alone? Battle after battle. And now there are people who are joining his community that are not joining his community with pure hearts. They're trying to sabotage. The peace treaties are violated. The Prophet is surrounded by people who want to cause him harm. Now, if you look at Surah Al-Duha, and I'll conclude with this, one of the greatest losses that the Prophet experienced was the loss of revelation. You know, Surah Al-Duha, especially during the early Meccan period, when Jibreel used to come down on the Prophet with revelation, it was relief for him. Because the world can be a very dark place. And for the Prophet, the moments of pure joy are when those heavenly words descend upon him. But the ahadith tell us, Ibn Abbas, he says, احتبس الوحي عن رسول الله, that revelation suddenly stopped for days. Some narrations say for weeks. Other narrations say for several months. There was no revelation. Nothing was coming down. To the point that the mushrikun of Mecca, they caught wind of this, that there are no new verses coming down to the Prophet. So what did they say? إِنَّ مُحَمَّدًا قَدْ وَدَّعَهُ رَبُّهُ وَقَلَىٰ. The Lord of Muhammad has abandoned him. He was abandoned. His Lord left him. You know, it's one thing to be orphaned because of the loss of your parents. But now everyone in the city is saying that even God has left you and you have been orphaned by your Lord. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's at his lowest point. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? You know, when you hear all of this negativity, it affects you. It brings you down. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals Surah Al-Duha when the Prophet was at his lowest point. How does Allah lift the spirits of His Prophet? He says, وَالضُّحَى. Allah swears by the morning light. What is the significance of swearing by the morning light when you have a prophet who is at his lowest point emotionally? You see, brothers and sisters, dawn and the rising of the sun has always been a metaphor for hope. In every culture, in every civilization, the rising of the sun has always been equated with hope. And as the saying goes, it is always darkest right before dawn. It's as if Allah is telling the Prophet that, do not think that the world is all dark. Yes, you're going to go through difficulties, but the sun is always going to rise. There's always a new day. Don't think about yesterday. Don't think about what the mushrikeen did to you yesterday or last week. There's always a new day that has new opportunity. There's new potential. Be positive. وَالضُّحَى. Through this natural phenomenon, the rising of the sun, Allah is reminding the Prophet that even in my creation, there are reminders for you to always be hopeful. There's no such thing as perpetual darkness. After darkness, there's light. After difficulty, there is hope. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. And then Allah swears by the night, the calmness of the night. One of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the night. That time when we get to slow down, we get to rest, we get to rejuvenate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has so much care for us that He has designed a system where we literally get to disconnect from the dunya. We get to sleep. No matter how bad your day is, that day is going to end. The sun will set and there will be rest for you. So Allah begins by doing what? He's changing the way that the Prophet is thinking. He's changing those negative thoughts and replacing them with positive thoughts. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Your Lord has not forsaken you. Your Lord does not despise you. Just because you're sick or you lost your job or you're having marital issues, whatever it may be, it doesn't mean that Allah doesn't care about you. It doesn't mean that Allah has abandoned you. Because even prophets went through difficulties. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. That what is the hereafter is better for you. No matter what you go through in this life, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you suffer every moment of your earthly life, the dunya is not eternal. As Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, كَأَنَّ الدُّنْيَا لَمْ تَكُنْ. It's as if this world never existed. وَكَأَنَّ الْآخِرَةَ لَمْ تَزَلْ. And it's as if the hereafter is all that ever existed. And then what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. There will come a time when Allah will give you until you are pleased, until you are satisfied. In this world, no matter what you have, you're never going to be fully satisfied. There's always going to be things that bother you or disturb you. The full pleasure and satisfaction and contentment comes when? The akhirah. The last chapter of humankind is a positive one. وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The good end is for the believers, for the pious. And then what does Allah do? You're in a dark place now. Don't forget about how Allah rescued you many times in your life. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Ya Rasulullah, don't be down. You think Allah is abandoning you now? Allah didn't abandon you when you were a young orphan. Didn't He find someone to take care of you? Weren't you cared for? Allah cares for us through people. He sends people in our lives. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. Were you not lost among your people and Allah guided your people to you? Allah raised you. You started off at a disadvantage. You were the orphan of Abd al-Muttalib, and now you are celebrated as Rasulullah until Yawm al-Qiyamah. Allah made you known. وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. You were poor, but Allah didn't forget you. Allah enriched you. He enriched you through the most noble woman, through Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam. Allah saved you through people. Now here, the surah teaches us what? In cognitive behavioral therapy, we understand that thoughts have an impact on our actions. But actions also reinforce thoughts. Allah doesn't only correct the thinking of the Prophet. He calls him to action. فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. Do not oppress the orphan. Sometimes when you go through difficulties, you feel helpless. Allah is saying that if you ever feel helpless, make yourself helpful to the most vulnerable people. If you feel like your life is meaningless because of your problems, give your life meaning by finding other vulnerable people and helping them. Because by helping them, you're going to cure yourself. Because by caring for them, you are going to mend your own wounds. فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. Do not repel the beggar. Help the most vulnerable. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Proclaim the ni'mah of your Lord. Practice gratitude. If you verbalize and you recount the blessings of Allah, you will realize that there are more blessings in your life than trials and tribulations. This was the Prophet. This is what makes him so inspirational. And in these nights, the nights of his shahada, he is gathering the closest people to him, his family. The narrations say that the Prophet wanted to spend his last hours with his Ahlul Bayt. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he enters and he sees the Prophet on his deathbed. And he sees the young Hassan and Hussein sitting on the chest of Rasulullah. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, thinking that the Prophet is in pain, he tries to remove Hassan and Hussein from the chest of the Prophet. And Rasulullah says, Ya Abul Hassan, Ya Ali, da'huma. Leave them, O Ali. Leave them so I can enjoy them in these last moments. And they can enjoy me. Because after me, they will be like orphans. Let them enjoy my presence. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he does something. He calls the light of his eyes, the fruit of his heart, Fatima Az-Zahraa. She comes. And the narrations say that he takes the hand of Fatima and he calls upon Ali. He says, Ali, come. He takes the hand of Fatima and he places it in the hand of Ali. And Rasulullah says, Ya Abul Hassan, هذه وديعة الله ووديعة رسوله عندك. O Ali, this is the trust that I am leaving with you. Rasulullah says to Ali that, O Ali, this Fatima, she is an amana that I am giving to you. She is the trust that I am giving to you. There were tears that were shed in those final hours. How do you farewell the Messenger of Allah? Jibreel used to tell the Prophet that, Ya Rasulullah, after you die, I am never going to descend upon the earth anymore. With your death, my work in dunya is finished. And hence, when the Prophet is with his family, there is a knock on the door. Fatima Az-Zahraa, the family, from behind the door, they say that Rasulullah's condition is worsening. He is not accepting any guests. Come back later. The person leaves, returns after an hour. Another knock on the door. Fulan, the Prophet's condition is worsening. We're not taking any guests. Leaves. A third time there is a knock. Again, the family of the Prophet says to the person who's knocking that the Prophet is not accepting any guests. And the answer comes that I have to come in because I'm not a guest. Rasulullah says, "O Fatima, behind the door is Malakul Maut." And Malakul Maut has never sought permission to ever enter a household. Nor will he ever ask permission to enter. But out of respect for your father, he is asking for permission to enter. Malakul Maut enters into the presence of Rasulullah. Ali is cradling the head of the Prophet. Fatima is sitting beside her father. Hassan and Hussein are at the feet of Rasulullah. Malakul Maut is now asking the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, you have a choice. I am not going to take your soul against your will. If you want to stay in dunya, you can remain. But if you want to depart, the time has come to depart. Rasulullah says, I want to wait for Jibreel. Jibreel has been with me at every moment in my life. I want to ask Jibreel, what should I do? Jibreel appears. Rasulullah says, Ya Jibreel, should I stay in dunya or should I depart? And this is where Jibreel says, Ya Rasulallah, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَىٰ وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Ya Rasulallah, the akhirah is better for you. Malakul Maut begins to draw the soul of the Prophet. Ali is holding him. As the process begins, Rasulullah begins to sweat. فَعَرَقَ جَبِينُهُ وَسَكَنَ أَنِينُهُ. He stretched his arms and his legs. ثُمَّ فَاضَتْ رُوحُهُ الدُّنْيَا رَحِمَ اللَّهَ مَنْ نَادَى وَمُحَمَّدًا وَمَظْلُومًا. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he raises the sheet that was above his head. He looks at the daughter of Rasulullah, Fatima, and he says to her, Ya bint Rasulillah, عظم الله لك الأجر بمصيبتنا برسول الله. The narrations say that after the death of the Prophet, Bilal stopped calling the adhan. After several weeks, Fatima alayhi salam, she made a request. Oh Bilal, can you recite the adhan? You have not recited it since the death of my father. When I hear the adhan, I remember the beautiful days with Rasulullah. Bilal says, yes, O daughter of Rasulullah, I will do it. He goes and he recites the adhan. The voice of Bilal is echoing. Everyone is coming out of their homes. Everyone is thinking, has Rasulullah come back to life? He recites Allahu Akbar. The moment Fatima hears the voice of Bilal, she bursts into tears. Again he recites Allahu Akbar. And then Bilal recites Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The moment that Fatima hears the name of her father, she faints. At that moment, Hassan and Hussein, they run out of the house and they call out to Bilal, Ya Bilal, iqta' al-adhan. Oh Bilal, stop reciting the adhan because we fear for our mother Fatima. La hawla wa la قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صل على محمد.
Hussein.
ختم رسولان کا آتا ہے تابوت یہ دین کے سلطان کا آتا ہے تابوت یہ پیٹتی ہے سر فاطمہ روتے ہیں مشکل کشا جبریل کا ہے سر کھلا آتا ہے تابوت یہ کرتے ہیں حسنین بکا دیتے ہیں رو رو کر صدا جاتے ہو نانا کہاں آتا ہے تابوت یہ فوج ملک ساتھ ہے سر کھلے جبریل ہے ہو گیا محشر بپا آتا ہے تابوت یہ کہتے ہیں اہل وطن ہائے رسول زمن چل بسے سوئے جنا آتا ہے تابوت یہ ہائے رسول مبین رحمت للعالمین راہ جنت ہوئے آتا ہے تابوت یہ ختم رسولان کا آتا ہے تابوت یہ دین کے سلطان کا آتا ہے تابوت یہ یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد ویران ہوا آج ویران ہوا آج سے دربار محمد محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد کفنانا ہے بھائی کو مگر ہو نہیں پاتا کفنانا ہے بھائی کو مگر ہو نہیں پاتا غش میں ہے نظر آیا غش میں ہے نظر آیا علمدار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد لوگو یہ شہادت ہے حسن مولا کے جیسی لوگو یہ شہادت ہے حسن مولا کے جیسی ایک زوجہ یہاں پر بھی ایک زوجہ یہاں پر بھی ہے غدار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد تک تک کے کیوں زہرا کو بکا کرتے ہیں احمد تک تک کے کیوں زہرا کو بکا کرتے ہیں احمد پہلو ہے تماچے ہیں پہلو ہے تماچے ہیں اب افکار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد تم جاتے ہو زہرا کا جو دروازہ جلانے تم جاتے ہو زہرا کا جو دروازہ جلانے سن لو اے مسلمانوں سن لو اے مسلمانوں خبردار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد جلتا ہوا در جس پہ گراتا ہے ستمگار جلتا ہوا در جس پہ گراتا ہے ستمگار پہچانو مسلمانوں پہچانو مسلمانوں ہے غم خار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد جس بی بی کی ایک پسلی بھی بچنے نہیں پائی جس بی بی کی ایک پسلی بھی بچنے نہیں پائی ہر ایک قدم پر تھی ہر ایک قدم پر تھی مددگار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد سر پیٹ کے روتے ہیں عزادار محمد یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم.
Brother and sister, it's now namaz time, so if I can ask him to please go ahead to the masjid and then we'll have tabarruk afterwards. Thank you.